Okay, today we have Professor Robert Mooney, who teaches at Washington College and is the co-founder of Etruscan Press, which you've heard about through our first week when I talked a little bit about publishing. Um, Bob is a novelist, and so as a poet and novelist, that's kind of been our conversation in Etruscan about the relative relationships between poetry and prose, and it's been a very productive conversation in terms of our ability to bring that to fruition in books. But in playtime, after hours, we tend to share poems, and there's sure to be a call at some point in the evening for Mooney to give us the Blake. And so I've heard this poem many times in all sorts of different venues. And so he's going to give us the Blake.
I am made to sow the thistle for wheat, the nettle for a nourishing dainty. I have planted a false oath in the earth. It has brought forth a poison tree. I have chosen the serpent for a counselor and the dog for a schoolmaster to my children. I have blotted out from light and living the dove and nightingale, and I have heard the earthworm beg from door to door. I have taught the thief a secret path into the house of the just. I have taught pale artifice to spread his nets upon the morning. My heavens are brass, my earth is iron, my moon a clod of clay, my sun a pestilence at noon, and a vapor of death in the night. What is the price of experience? Do men buy it for a song or wisdom for a dance in the street? No. It's bought with the price of all that a man has: his house, his wife, his children. Wisdom is sold in the desolate marketplace where none come to buy, and in the withered field where the farmer plows for bread in vain. It's an easy thing to triumph in the summer sun and in the vintage, and to sing on the wagon loaded with corn. It's an easy thing to talk of patience to the afflicted, to speak the laws of prudence to the houseless wanderer, to listen to the hungry raven's cry in wintry fields, when the red blood is filled with wine and with the marrow of lambs. It's an easy thing to laugh at the wrathful elements, to hear the dog howl at the wintry door, the ox in the slaughterhouse moan, to see a god on every wind and a blessing on every blast, to hear the sounds of love in the thunderstorm that destroys our enemy's house, and rejoice in the blight that covers his field and in the sickness that cuts off his children, while our olive and vines sing and laugh round our door, and our children bring fruits and flowers. Then the groan and the dolour are quite forgotten, and the slave grinding at the mill, and the captive in chains, and the poor in the prison, and the soldier in the field as he lies among the happier dead. It's an easy thing to triumph and rejoice in the tents of prosperity. Thus could I sing and thus rejoice. But it is not so with me.
Wow, thank you. It's always, I feel like I'm hearing it for the first time. And
That's Blake.
I also remember that line from James Wright, who said, somebody asked him afterwards, "Is that a real poem or did you just make that up?" And in a sense, hearing you read it, it feels so immediate that I'm thinking, well, this is Mooney talking here. This is not,
No, it's Blake through the instrument of Mooney. As you know, being a bard yourself. But isn't that what great poetry and great art is? It feels like it was made for us just yesterday.
Just yesterday, sure. And now, just a little history. How did you come upon that poem, and what lodged it into your body like that?
Actually, I was in graduate school, and a fellow graduate student began a reading. He said, "This is one of my favorite passages in all of poetry." This is somebody who was in the Bardic school and learning the craft of poetry, moving toward the art of poetry for himself. And he said, "This is kind of my anthem for how I feel." Blake, he found in Blake's heart part of his own. It's that immediacy again. And he recited it, and everybody, did what you just did. When you heard it, it's like, wow, this guy isn't just speaking to me. My heart is speaking in dialogue with him.
And it's also amazing, when as we look at Blake, we start with reading just The Lamb, songs of innocence, and the Chimney Sweep, both versions, the song from the Songs of Innocence and Experience, and then onto onto the Tiger, of course. And those poems are so iconic, so well known, and relatively simple in their form.
Yeah.
That people think, oh, okay, well, that's who Blake is. And then you come up with, the four Zoas from which this passage is taken, which has got to be one of the most challenging and difficult and mystical, visionary works of art, that we've ever seen. And we were just talking about that earlier. Tell us a little about the four Zoas and what's going on there.
Well, going into the four Zoas, which is one of these works of art, when, say, a young reader comes across it and says, "Oh my God, look at all these words," look at these poetical devices that I'm trying to, work into my own way of looking at poems, and it looks, challenging, disconcerting. But if you go back to like Tiger, you mentioned, Blake had a true love of all human beings, but especially children. I don't think he ever lost his inner child, and as Oscar Wilde, the great Irish writer, once said, the soul is born old and grows young, and the body is born young and grows old, and that is life's tragedy. But the genius of Blake was taking that old soul into his adult world, and so when he's writing work that looks more challenging, more complex, the same principles are there. If you listen, for example, to Enion's Lament, which I just said, to a child, it would be the kind of sonorous song where the child wouldn't know what the words meant necessarily, but they'd say, "Let me hear it again," just for the music. Then when you go back to it, is probably all of you, have your favorite songs that you could hear all day long, or you've been listening to, from downloading it, 5 years ago. I want to hear this again. The words begin to project different feelings and images through images in your head. And when you give something like the four Zoas time, you can live in a moment, in an image. You start asking questions. The four Zoas is, it's Blake doing what Tolkien did. He's creating a whole sort of universe that deals with laws that are like ours, but change. Harry Potter would be another example. And you get into that universe. In his universe, he's playing with this idea of what we would call an archetypal man or woman, and that is a particular, like the original human being, with all our characteristics. And then the idea that we have fallen, like Adam and Eve. And in his particular cosmology, in his universe here, he's looking at the fall has taken place where the human being has been divided into four basic types. And actually, just to give you an idea, he makes up these names, like Tolkien makes up names like Hobbit and in other mythologies that you've read in more modern times. But the four sort of people represent different parts of who we all are. Like Urizen, is our reason, or Urthena, Luva and Thumus are like the imagination, passionate love, the idea of, passionate love and empathic love, or love that we have for others from heart to heart. And he plays around with these types that are working with and against each other in this adventure story, basically in verse, asking the questions that we all ask and often don't talk about until the shank of the evening or at 4 in the morning. What's it all about? Why are we here? Why am I like this? What is good? What is evil? What is right? What is wrong? And Enion's Lament comes, there are male and female manifestations that are working with and against each other, just like in real life. And, trying to grapple with basically, what does it mean to lead a good life? What is evil? And that's what Enion is really asking here. I am made to sow the thistle for wheat. I've cheated. I have caused the earthworm to beg from door to door. I've given my school children, a dog as a master to learn from. Deception, lies, for the gratification of the ego of the adult who is failing the child.
Mm-hmm.
It's like having, a bad professor, like currently you don't have, but a bad parenting, we all make mistakes. And Enion is saying, I have made these mistakes. And I was cleansed through experience, which, by the way, experience offers you wisdom, but not, at Lord and Taylor, but in the marketplace where none come to buy. Mm. Away from all these distractions. Sorry, the digital distractions. Talk about failing you. I think our generation, we got you where we want you, the worst of us, staring at a screen where we can sell you stuff in the name of making you mature and successful. Blake, he worked against that, but he saw himself as part of the problem. And that's how you get wisdom, is you realize, I too have failed people that are counting on me. And the poetry is a way of working that out. Blake in The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, as he talks about, we are half good and we are half evil. And we need that evil part. We can't just say, that's not me, that's scapegoating. Mm-hmm. What he's saying is, it was a famous line in Blake, you cannot be whole until you embrace your specter, until you own what is not good about you, because it's a part of you. And if you own it, you can use it for the good. If you deny it, you're that guy. You're the person. And notice how we tend to, and Blake would have been into this too, what we hate about people that really impassion our hatred. A lot of that, we have to come to terms with the fact that we're recognizing it in ourselves and we don't like it. And if we can deny it, that's why great writers, fiction, poetry, dramatic poetry like this, all villains have virtue. And all the heroes have vices. That's what makes it challenging, but it's what makes it interesting too, because it presents to the reader a real challenge. That's what we see in that character, like Enion. Oh my God, she is flawed, like me. And we can become enlightened. And that can be what Blake, I think, is saying. What is the price of experience? You don't buy it for a song. You don't buy it for a dance in the street. It is sold in the withered field. It's where none come to buy. And Blake was forever most attracted socially to the losers. because he recognized that in himself, and he knew how alone they felt. And I think it's the mission of all great poetry. You are not alone.
Hearing that too, at first I was, there's so many images in such density. I mean, I beg the earthworm. How's the earthworm? I've sent the earthworm from door to door. There's so much to unpack there, especially, he has other poems where he's using earthworm, snake, poison tree. There's a poem called The Poison Tree. So he's these images start to take on a reality as they move from poem to poem. And I mean, who could think of a more surreal image than this earthworm begging from door to door? And yet, at the same time, as you were talking, Bob, I was thinking, he's living in a Dickensian world. Dickens, was trying to portray this and perhaps move people toward action. There's a polemical element in Dickens, whereas Blake is moving to not action, but to transformation of the self.
Right.
That's the difference between perhaps Dickens and Blake, is that Dickens has bad guys. Now, they're interesting bad guys. They are. Yeah. They're good villains, and not good villains, but they're usually very flamboyant or quirky villains. But they're definitely villains. Whereas with Blake, he's looking at this as if it's all part of the human faculty. And so living in that same London, with chimney sweeps and poverty and dogs, when you said the dog, I have made the dog my master. I'm thinking I've got all the characters in Dickens who are schoolmasters, and who are really animals, but he doesn't use that psychological internal dream imagery that we get from Blake, which is enormous. And I think we're going to see in a lot of writers, obviously, Joyce, Yeats, a movement, from simplicity to more a proliferation of form, which certainly we see in Blake. And I'm so glad to hear that from the Four Zoas, because I know that both of us, in school, the Four Zoas were kind of presented as 19th century's Finnegan's Wake. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's this monster of a poem that's going to eat you alive, and you're never going to get to the end of it. And yet, here it is being given to us in this incredibly immediate and new way. And you realize maybe it had to be that mysterious when you're young in order for it to be lucid when you're old.
Exactly. Because you're not using buzzwords. You're not introducing, a mechanical device or a particular thing out of nature that is going to send the reader's mind off away from, the actual task at hand, which in this poem, and certainly in any great poem or novel or story, it's all about communion. It's all about, you are invited, whoever you are, and it's my job to make you want to stay. I think you're right with Dickens. It's more a call to the impulse in the reader is to political or social action, to right an injustice. Blake and Joyce are more interested in instituting, a sense of justice, wisdom, holiness, whatever, inside you, and the rest will take care of itself. You don't need to necessarily join a group to get that kind of sustenance as a human being. Not that you shouldn't join groups or movements, but it starts in the heart, not in the town hall. Right. Take care of your own house first, your own heart. And both of these, Joyce and Blake, continually go back to Dante, whose famous line is, Virgil, the great Roman poet, takes Dante up to the gates of heaven, where the love of his life is. He's been on this long journey literally through hell and purgatory. And Virgil's last words to Dante are, love and do as you please. Love and do anything you want, because if you truly love, you cannot do wrong.
Mm.
You may break laws, but if it's real love, not just using the word like, the dog schoolmaster,
Right.
but if you have purged, literally, Dante has. Joyce was modeled Ulysses and Finnegan's Wake after Dante. Blake, of course, is part of that continuum. Dante, Blake, Joyce, they're all interested in the human being in this incredible, dramatic, and comedic play called humanity, and all that it can bring. And that's why the scope of this poem, it looks challenging, but just pay attention to the characters, because you're them. It's not only, it's about you. Blake is telling the world about you. And Whitman, I would include in this. If you've ever read the great Walt Whitman, American poet, you and me are the same person. Time and space separate us into these individuals, and we're kind of incarcerated in time and space. But these guys are doing what every great writer does. Every great writer has an eye on eternity. They don't confine themselves to choose the simple laws and lack of wonder that we sometimes have in time and space. There was a line I was looking up earlier. This is Joyce on Blake. Joyce says about Blake, he was convinced that eternity was in love with the products of time. Mm-hmm. And even though we can't understand eternity, if just trying to wrap our head around it and see how it can shed a greater light on the lives that we do live, that's Blake. That's Joyce. And you don't do it unless you look beyond, the time and space that we're in. And I think absolutely, Phil, the idea that you create your own universe, the laws of which are very familiar to us, but the universe itself is slightly different from ours. It allows us that childish wonder, childlike wonder of everything being new, and gets you paying attention. What's this?
What is it in The Marriage of Heaven and Hell? Is how do we know but that every bird that cuts the airy way is an immense world of delight closed to our senses five.
Yeah.
And that sense of eternity in time is so much a part of Blake. And as we're going to see also as a part of much of the romantic experience, the kind of disruption of scale, the sense that these, just as the chimney sweep, as you said earlier, and the attendants and the poor are just as important as the great wealthy, and and gosh, aren't we seeing that nowadays, people wanting to hail the economy at perhaps the expense of people dying,
right?
Instead of seeing that the smallest things, you can see infinity in a grain of sand, eternity in an hour. When you start to see those things, then the hierarchies in which Blake saw so starkly begin to dissolve.
Yeah. Well, the problem with politicians, kings, of all time, is that they think in fiscal years or 5-year plans. We need poets because poets think in centuries.
Mm.
And you can see that today. What's the plan? Every leader needs to be reminded by a poet that the decisions you make today, you should have in mind 5 generations down. Mm-hmm. Not just your kids. In our age, it's not even that. Talk about having a dog for a schoolmaster to our children. There are failures in paying it forward in a significant way that nurtures our spirit. And the way to do that is to understand. Well, Phil, you said earlier, the Blake that I recited. It could have been written by a contemporary, somebody last week. Oh my God, that's me, instead of 200 years ago.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is what the American poet Ezra Pound used to say: literature is news that stays news.
Mm.
And it stays news because the human heart is in this cycle, the rise and fall of civilizations. What we're experiencing now is nothing new. It has happened to the human heart with different colors, different gadgets, different names for places, different maps, but it's still the human heart in this life, in this world, surrounded by eternity. And to know those patterns, as Blake did, to write the four Zoas, to know that pattern that Joyce certainly did in writing Finnegan's Wake, is to see ourselves on the world stage in our time. Dickens will say it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. But at a graduation speech where I teach one time, the speaker quoted, it was the best of times. It may be the best of times, it may be the worst of times, but they're the only times you have. And I think it's through poetry that we can get that wisdom, sending us to the desolate marketplace where none come to buy, and talking to the people there and feeling truly alive.
Robert Mooney, thank you so much for joining us today.
It was a pleasure. I wish I could see you all.
All right.